We're in a series called Jesus Sightings, and we've been looking through the eyes of the witnesses, including John, getting refreshed in what they saw when they saw Jesus, so that we are more prepared to see Jesus today, the resurrected Jesus, still ministering and moving on earth and doing his work, so we can recognize him when he makes himself known. So let's first read verses 1 through 6 of John's Gospel. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy food? Or where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. So, Jesus constantly saw the world's needs. The reason why the Father sent the Son to the earth to be the incarnation we'll celebrate soon at Christmas is because the Father, who had heard the prayers of the world's people, wanted to be with people, the human race, wanted to experience the needs himself. And so he sent his Son. And whenever Jesus ministered, his impact was so incredible that, of course, people rushed to be near him. And we see that this became an opportunity to test the disciples. Now, here we heard him just say that he wanted to test him. Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, telling the same story with a slightly complimentary account, a few more details, says this. He says, it was late in the day. It was late in the day. And they were in a remote place. And so this is a scene in which it was going to soon be a pretty serious situation. People were grumpy and upset and frustrated with each other for such a huge crowd. And so Jesus, who knew what he was going to do, yet wanted to test them. Now, remember that I said to you that John's gospel always operates on two levels. It operates on a actually, ordinary life level, and then there's a symbolic level. And the symbolic level is, of course, that disciples who are ministering in Jesus' name, who are trying to follow Jesus Christ and overflow with his grace and truth, they're going to have people coming to them with needs. And so this story about Jesus back then represents what we should be facing now, if in fact we are allowing the Spirit of Jesus Christ to be manifested in our lives and in our community. And so Jesus decides he wants to test the disciples. And this is something he does. Jesus doesn't just minister in Galilee for a little while to show who he is before, the evil forces conspire to crucify him and crown it with resurrection. In the process, Jesus has his disciples with him in the mission field, in the ministry, because he's mentoring them, he's apprenticing them in how they're going to be his life on earth after he has ascended into heaven. So he's putting them in situations constantly that they're going to quickly discover they're over their heads. And they can't deal with it, except for his presence makes it possible, not only for them to deal with it, but for ministry to thrive and for lives to be blessed, even with such human need. And so listen to how the disciples responded to Jesus when he tested them. How are we going to feed all these people? What are we going to do? Verse 7. Philip answered him, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Another of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Well, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will that go among the many? And so what we see here is what people have often called a scarcity mentality. A scarcity mentality. And I want to say, first of all, that they're being realistic. They're counting the cost. Ray, I dare say there's an accountant somewhere among them. Somebody's got to keep track of the numbers and ask the hard questions. Are we going to have enough? We don't want to promise something that we can't deliver. But the scarcity mentality, which is responsible. In ordinary life, all of us need to make sure to live in a budget, not be foolish with resources. Scarcity is, in fact, of course, a reality of ordinary life. The problem is that fear of shortage, which is natural to life, that, if you will, self-centeredness, which is part of being a human being. You've got to take care of yourself. In fact, you don't take care of yourself, you're no good to the people you're supposed to take care of. The reality is that it's fear-driven. And that when we receive the presence, power, and the love of Jesus Christ, while we need to live with our feet on the ground, our decision shouldn't be driven by fear of scarcity. That our reaction to any need, financial, or a need for somebody who wants to tell us their problem, something we should pray for. I don't have time for this. That fear-based, self-centered based scarcity mentality is the antithesis of the person who bears the Spirit as a follower of Jesus Christ. And yet we see Jesus' own disciples acting this way. It would take a whole bunch of money to feed these people tonight. We've actually got these 5 loaves and 2 fish. This is really not going to provide Jesus. The good news is that Jesus came to earth, not that we be irresponsible and spend our resources wildly, but that we be able to be less fearful about the needs of people around us. And I'm really tonight not talking as much about people's financial needs, though obviously in a world of hunger where so many people have to fear for whether there's enough food for their children tonight, that's there and that's something we always respond to. I'm talking even though about our fear of needy people relationally, because when I think about the kind of barrier we all have to overcome to be part of a church like this, the great temptation is to be part of a congregation which sort of feeds us and then lets us go and do our thing as long as we come back next week to get fed some more. And as a church, which like all churches will either have to do or go out of business, start being the body of Christ, being the church, not just people going to church. The issue is there are people around us who are needy in some way. Maybe they're emotionally needy. Maybe they're just lonely. Of course, many times beneath the surface, they're spiritually needy. And our fear is, I just don't have enough to give. My family requires so much of me, my own needs. I don't have any more to give. And that's, speaking candidly, all of us, including myself, who's had to adjust to working at home and having my office at home and having kids knock on my door because they know I'm at home and want me to fix their bikes. That's a new life for me. I used to work at a big office with all kinds of people protecting me from all that need. You had to go through a labyrinth in my old life to get to me. And now I'm out there. So this is not just, this is the preacher stepping on his own toes about people and their needs. Just an aside, I really believe more than ever that even though none of our contexts that we work in are truly needy, some environments, some neighborhoods are more affluent than others in terms of financial needy. The greatest need of all that unites everybody is loneliness. That's why so many people will be responding to the future fiestas that the beachside group has. That's why 24 people showed up at our house for 36 hours. Notice, once they felt comfortable with us, is because people will respond because they are yearning for something more. Well, back to the story. Jesus proclaims and embodies what I call abundance reality. So you got scarcity mentality. With Jesus, abundance reality. Let's read the rest of the story. Verse 10, Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat. That's interesting. Sorry, my translation's funny. Anyway, when everybody had as much food as we just had, okay? That's my paraphrase. He said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. And so, 3 basic aspects of Jesus' abundant reality. First of all, somebody gave all that he had. That one little boy was thinking, I'm glad I was smart enough to listen to my mama when she said, "You better take a lunch to hear that preacher." You know, he was prepared. And he's looking at all these people that weren't prepared. And the disciples say, "We need your food." So somebody gave all he had. And when people trust Jesus' abundant reality, they can give everything. Now, of course, he gives back to us our lives and all that we're entrusted with when we give it to him. But we give to him and we trust him with all that we have. And even if he needs more than we thought he was going to need, we know he will provide all that we need, especially all that we need to be happy. Because living with a shortage mentality, just hoarding up in your life, is not what produces happy people. And he wants to bless us. The second thing we notice is that Jesus, of course, multiplied the small amount. It was a supernatural miracle. This is not ordinary scarcity stuff. This isn't, the world we normally live in. This is the physics of Jesus Christ. Now we know from the physicists that came after Einstein and all those people that there are alternative universes, and that what we think of as the way things are is only is relative to certain conditions. That's the theory of relativity. Being a creator, he could speak the word and multiply the matter. And he did. And what's reminiscent of this account is that the Jewish people received manna from heaven for the 40 years that they wandered as God was preparing them for the promised land. And so this 5,000 group of people, mainly Jewish, I imagine, were reminded of how God provided for their ancestors, and now the Messiah was providing for them. We are reminded of a special ceremony when we read these words. I'll read them to you again. Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those. What does that remind you of? Communion, the Lord's Supper. Yeah, when we do that, which is, of course, based on the Last Supper Jesus had on Maundy, Thursday, we are also remembering how he multiplied, the loaves and fishes prior to that last night of his life. And the final thing is this interesting note about them collecting all the extra food. I've wondered, what was the extra food for? I mean, if you're with Jesus, they don't need to collect the extra food, right? That's clear. I think the best explanation for collecting the extra food is this was the early form of the church, and he was saying to them, you're going to be giving this away. Collect it. Don't waste it. We're going to be giving this away. there is sufficient resource. There is enough to be generous and for the people of God to be known as people who give, instead of hoarding, with grateful hearts to share. Now, this whole story is, and it's 2 points I've tried to make. The disciples, who tend to have a scarcity mentality, and Jesus, who has in his presence this abundant reality. These two contrasts. It reminds me of two things that are going to be happening or one thing that will be happening this week, and one thing we'll be thinking of. The thing that will be happening this week is Black Friday. But we have a picture of that, I believe. Yeah, that was one of the tamer pictures I found on the internet of Black Friday. There's no blood actually running from people's faces in that picture. Okay, would you say Black Friday is more representative of a scarcity mentality or an abundant reality? They're very good, Beverly. Excellent. Black Friday is about scarcity. It's about, and again, there is a time and a place for being prudent, for using our resources well. We've never claimed that Christians can just go out and put stuff on the credit card and Jesus takes care of it. So there's good shoppers, yes. But the fear and the hoarding and the loss of perspective about what matters, which is so often evident, we hear the news reports of Black Friday, is not the life that God wanted for us. A great example, which is the contrast, is found on Thanksgiving of abundant reality, and it's this primary image of Thanksgiving. The Pilgrims with the Native Americans. This is a recreation in one of the places in Virginia, I think Plymouth, Virginia. And, of course, the Pilgrims invited the Native Americans to share the feast with them, in large part because the Native Americans had taught them how to farm. Remember, they had to learn, or maybe this is just in the movies, they put the dead fish on top of the, I guess that really happened. But, they taught them how to farm. And so, even though the Native Americans had a religion that did not understand who Jesus Christ was, based on a much more simpler concept of the deity, they could gather at one table. They could celebrate God's presence. And I would dare say that of all the relationships of the Christian Europeans who came to North America, this is one of the better times of bearing witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ, to treat them as friends and equals and to sit at the table together as brothers and sisters in the human race. And so this is the image we want to remember this week of people who have an abundance mentality because of the abundant reality of Jesus Christ. And whatever we have enough. And we have enough to share. And it gladdens our hearts to share because we're grateful people. And it's one of the ways we want to give God pleasure in how we're becoming more like him as people of grace. I read a story years ago in a book called Ordinary Miracles. New York Times writer Nick Taylor wrote about going back to church. He was a secular guy. And he met a woman named Judy Salerno, who, like himself, was about 40 years old. And she returned to church because she had a spiritual yearning, like some of the people we're starting to connect with in our missional communities. Some of the people who will eventually be with us in worship because we're starting to connect with them. And when she heard that the food pantry was about to be closed, at the church food pantry, for lack of resources, because of the love of God she'd experienced in the warm welcome, she decided to take charge of it. And she knew of a way to multiply the donations. She took the little bit of money the food pantry had, and then she went shopping, and the New York Times reporter went with her, Nick Taylor. Now, why would he go with her shopping? Well, Catherine Fennell, Judy, was a couponer. And there's some pretty crazy couponers out there. So let me read you a brief little account from this book, Ordinary Miracle. Nick writes, in the next aisle, Judy spied a display of crackers and her eyes lit up. New Nabisco cheddar wedgies, read the sign. She picked up a box and found the price. Now here's where we're going to make a killing, she said with satisfaction. 10.5-ounce boxes were for sale, 2 for $3. Now this is a few years ago. The prices may not exactly apply. We have 75-cent coupons, which are going to get doubled to $1.50, which is how much they cost. She stripped the whole display of cheddar wedges, 27 boxes. She had 5 coupons left. Maybe they'll have an in display, she said. Well, that was exciting. Next, piling cream of wheat into her cart at $1.49 a box, Judy said she was annoyed. She'd expected to find it at $1.39. She fished in her coupon bags, discarded some outdated coupons, and found some current ones worth 65 cents that would double to $1.30. So that's only going to be 19 cents a box, she said. But free would have been better. I'll just get 10 boxes. It'll be cheaper at ShopRite. I asked her why the New York supermarkets didn't double coupons. They're in Connecticut. Judy said, some people think it's because of me. That New York stopped doubling the coupons. Here's my favorite part. The checkout girl was young, blonde and visibly bored. She cracked her gum and dragged the groceries, item by item, across the light beams that read the universal product codes. No addition was needed. It seemed excruciating work for her. The bill for all this food was $103.43. Judy held out her wad of coupons, and the checker's jaw set. She gave an exasperated little huff, cracked her gum again, and then she started entering the coupons using the register keys this time. People behind her moved to other lines. The cash register receipt peeled out endlessly, curling on the floor. It was 5 feet long before all the discounts had been taken. That brought the bill down to $13.11. Judy counted out the money, and we took 6 bags of groceries to her car. Then we headed for the ShopRite. Free food for hungry people. If it would not have taken, it would not have taken a great leap to get from Judy Salerno, pleading for donations and double discount coupons, shopping, to the miracle of the loaves and fishes. What I see, or what I hear when I read that story, is the real wonder isn't just somebody could actually buy 6 bags of groceries for $13. It's that Judy Salerno was outside the family of God. And she was welcomed. And it changed her. And she became a person who used her gifts and skill to the glory of God. And so people were fed because Judy Salerno was fed first. And that church will be our mentality of abundance. I want to close by giving Tim a surprise. I know you're getting ready to perhaps take Lucy out, but let me show you a little surprise before you go, if you need to go. We did not choreograph this. It says, anyone can count the seeds in an apple, but only God can count the apples in the seed. That's what Tim told us earlier. By the way, this hangs in my bathroom in a place strategic where I will see it regularly. Because if I can believe that in every seed is a nearly infinite source of fruit, then I will be somebody, not obnoxiously, but simply faithfully, who shares the good news of Jesus Christ and trusts that God is at work to grow many of those seeds. And some of them are going to yield a huge return and a lot more seeds. That's the abundance of Jesus Christ. Let's pray.